Vistara Airlines Flight 944 was making its way from Mumbai to Delhi, with 155 passengers and 7 crew members on board. Everything seemed normal, but as the aircraft neared Delhi, the weather took a dangerous turn. Heavy rain, tornado-like winds, and dense clouds made the runway impossible to see. Tension was rising in the cockpit. Fuel was running dangerously low, and with each passing second, the plane was getting closer to disaster. Now, the lives of 162 people depended on the decisions the pilots would make in the next few minutes. Would they manage a safe landing, or would this flight turn into another heartbreaking tragedy? This is the story of Vistara Flight 944. It's the afternoon of July 15, 2019, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport is busy as usual, with thousands of people coming and going every day. Among the crowd, Vistara Flight 944 is preparing for its journey from Mumbai to Delhi. This flight was special because it connected Mumbai and Delhi daily, carrying thousands of passengers. The total flight time was approximately 2 hours, covering a distance of 150 kilometers. The aircraft was expected to reach Delhi by 5 p.m. for this journey. An A320, just 1 year old, was being used for this flight. It was a new and modern aircraft designed to consume less fuel, offer more comfort, and provide a safe travel experience. Vistara Airlines, founded in 2015, was a joint venture between Tata Sons and Singapore Airlines. In just a few years, it had established itself in the Indian aviation industry, becoming the third largest airline after Indigo and Air India. There were 155 passengers aboard this flight, with 5 flight attendants and 2 pilots responsible for their safety. As passengers boarded, the aircraft was being filled with 8,500 kilograms of fuel. This amount of fuel was enough for the flight to not only cover the distance between Mumbai and Delhi, but also to handle any emergency diversions if necessary. In the cockpit, the pilots were making final preparations for the flight. The captain, age 30, had 8,500 hours of flying experience, most of which were accumulated flying this type of aircraft. Flying this plane was nothing new for him. Seated next to him was a 28-year-old first officer with 1,600 flying hours, 400 of which were on this particular aircraft type. They had spent most of their careers flying this very aircraft. Though both pilots were young, their training and experience had shaped them into capable professionals. The aircraft, prepared for Vistara Flight 944, was nearly ready for takeoff, but today, the weather was telling a different story. It was the month of July, and the monsoon was at its peak in northern India. Dark clouds loomed over the skies, and heavy rain was falling across much of the region. Flying in such conditions is always a challenge, but this is where experienced pilots prove their skills. Today, however, was no ordinary day. It would be a true test of the pilot's decision-making, wisdom, and abilities. Before the flight, the pilots were given important information. One of these documents was the transit briefing sheet, which included details about the weather and a list of alternate airports where the plane could land in case of an emergency. According to this sheet, Ahmedabad was listed as the first alternate and Lucknow as the second. But when the captain reviewed another critical document, the Operational Flight Plan, OFP, he noticed a serious discrepancy. The OFP listed Lucknow as the first alternate and Jaipur as the second. These two documents should have had identical information so that if the weather worsened or any issue prevented the aircraft from landing in Delhi, the pilot would know exactly where to divert. This inconsistency could potentially become a problem for Flight 944. Around 3 p.m., the aircraft was cleared for pushback. A light mist hung in the air, but overall the weather was still considered suitable for flight. The pilot slowly started the engines, and the aircraft began taxiing toward the runway. Flight 944 took off from Mumbai at 3:01 p.m. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, passengers and crew settled in comfortably. Everything felt normal, just like any other routine flight, but no one knew that things were about to change within minutes. At the time of departure, the aircraft had 8,274 kilograms of fuel, enough to reach Delhi safely. Additionally, there were 1,100 kilograms of reserve fuel on board, allowing for diversion to an alternate airport if needed. The aircraft gradually climbed to an altitude of 35,000 feet. The pilots were in constant communication with air traffic control and were flying on the designated route. But meanwhile, monsoon storms had started forming over Delhi. The weather department had already issued a warning about deteriorating conditions. But the pilots overlooked one critical task: monitoring the weather at alternate airports along the route. Had the pilots checked in advance, they might have known about the worsening conditions in Delhi and evaluated options like Ahmedabad, Udaipur, or Jaipur. These airports could have offered safer landing alternatives. As the flight neared Delhi, the crew received troubling news. A severe storm had engulfed the capital. Winds were extremely strong, heavy rain was falling, and thick clouds covered the sky. In such conditions, landing an aircraft becomes extremely challenging. As the plane began preparing for descent, another alert came from air traffic control. Conditions had worsened further. Landing was now impossible. Several aircraft had already attempted to land but were forced to go around. Flight 944 was instructed to enter a holding pattern. The crew became fully alert, closely monitoring the evolving weather conditions. The biggest question now was, if a landing in Delhi was not possible, what would be the next move? The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The skies were darkening, rain was intensifying, and the aircraft was experiencing turbulence. The crew kept receiving constant updates, but still, no clearance for landing had been given. Meanwhile, only 1,100 kilograms of reserve fuel remained on board. The additional fuel on board was meant to allow the aircraft to circle over Delhi for a while, hoping the weather would improve. But doing so meant giving up the option to divert to Ahmedabad. Still, the captain decided to wait. With every passing minute, the fuel levels were dropping, and this decision to wait turned out to be his biggest mistake. After circling Delhi for too long, diverting to Ahmedabad was no longer possible. That left only two options: either keep waiting for clearance to land in Delhi, or divert to Lucknow. But without clear instructions, it wasn't an easy decision. This was the moment to consider an alternative. Jaipur was nearby and the weather there was fine, but the problem was, Vistara Airlines had no operational support at Jaipur. That meant the aircraft would be on the ground with no technical or ground support, and passengers could face delays and inconvenience. So, as per airline policy, Lucknow was given priority, even though Jaipur was the safer option. The aircraft continued circling over Delhi for 20 minutes. Now, only 3,800 kilograms of fuel remained. The captain informed air traffic control that they could remain airborne for just 10 more minutes. After that, they would have no choice but to divert. Tension was rising, and with every minute, the fuel levels were falling dangerously low. Then, just when the situation had become critical, air traffic control finally delivered some relief. At 4:05 p.m., the crew was informed they could begin the landing procedure in Delhi. That message gave the crew a sense of hope. This was their final chance to land in Delhi, but a major error was about to happen. The question now was, would the severe weather allow a safe landing, or was the greatest danger still ahead? As the aircraft approached the runway, the weather suddenly worsened. Strong winds made it difficult to keep the aircraft stable. The captain lowered the landing gear and set the flaps, but the aircraft kept shaking. Passengers were feeling the turbulence and gripped their seats in fear. And just as the plane descended to 250 feet, it began to shake violently. As the aircraft approached the runway, the wind direction suddenly changed, and strong tailwinds began to blow. On top of that, the runway was wet, making the risk of skidding much higher if brakes were applied. In such conditions, stopping the aircraft safely would be extremely difficult. The captain quickly decided it was no longer safe to land. He initiated a go-around and climbed the aircraft back into the air. But now, they were in the sky again, with limited fuel. The pilots immediately decided to divert to Lucknow and began checking weather conditions there. However, before they could reach Lucknow, another problem emerged. The weather there had also deteriorated. Meanwhile, another complication arose inside the cockpit. The flight path to Lucknow passed near Agra, which is home to an Indian Air Force base, a restricted airspace where civilian aircraft aren't allowed to fly. As a result, the captain had to take a longer route, consuming more fuel and time. The flight was now in its critical final stage, and the situation was becoming even more serious. At this point, air traffic control advised the crew to divert to Jaipur instead, where the weather was clear and the airport was closer than Lucknow. As soon as ATC suggested Vistara Flight 944 head to Jaipur, the crew declined and insisted on proceeding to Lucknow. Even though Jaipur was safer, the pilots followed airline policy, which had designated Lucknow as their official alternate airport.
Vistara 944, are you interested in diverting to Jaipur? Is the airport available? Negative, sir. Lucknow is our designated alternate.
The decision was made. Flight 944 was now headed toward Lucknow. Initially, everything appeared to be under control. But as the aircraft began descending for landing, the situation became alarmingly similar to Delhi. Due to worsening weather and reduced visibility, air traffic control was forced to divert Vistara Flight 944 once again. The situation became even more critical. The pilots had nearly run out of fuel, so they informed Air Traffic Control, ATC, that they could no longer wait. Meanwhile, another aircraft attempting to land had to abort due to poor visibility, adding to the chaos. The failed landing of that aircraft due to bad weather made things worse. Vistara Flight 944 was also forced to abort its landing and climb again. This delay worsened the crisis, as fuel levels were dropping rapidly. At 6:01 p.m., the pilots declared minimum fuel, indicating they had only 20 to 25 minutes of flight time left. Shortly after, the fuel indicator entered the amber zone, a clear sign of danger. With the situation becoming more serious by the second and no other options remaining, the pilots issued a mayday call.
Vistara 944 declaring fuel emergency, requesting immediate landing clearance at any available airport.
But now, the biggest threat loomed. Would Vistara Flight 944 be able to land safely, or was another disaster waiting in the darkness and storm ahead? Everything seemed to be going wrong. First, the landing in Delhi failed. Then, due to poor weather, they had to change course. When they reached Lucknow, conditions prevented landing again. The pilots then considered diverting to Kanpur, but the weather there was no better. Next, they tried heading toward Prayagraj, but a new problem emerged. The captain realized they might not have enough fuel to make it to Prayagraj either. What made matters worse was that the aircraft's systems didn't have navigational data or landing charts for either Kanpur or Prayagraj. This meant they were attempting to fly blind, without digital support, a dangerously risky move. As the aircraft turned toward Prayagraj, a ray of hope emerged. Air traffic control informed them that conditions in Lucknow had improved, and visibility had increased to 600 meters, just enough for a safe landing. Air traffic control informed them that conditions in Lucknow had improved, and visibility had increased to 600 meters, just enough for a safe landing. Soon, another update came in. The visibility had improved even further. Hearing this brought a new ray of hope to everyone. The first officer immediately sent a message to the control tower.
Lucknow, this is Vistara 944. We are turning back towards Lucknow.
Without any delay, the captain began preparations to land on runway 27. They had only one chance now. If the weather worsened again in Lucknow, the situation could turn extremely dangerous. The fuel on board was so low that there was no chance of attempting another landing. Air traffic control immediately cleared the shortest and most direct route because the aircraft was now flying on fuel fumes alone. Now the question was, could they make a safe landing on the first try? This was their final attempt, or a new disaster could be waiting, moments. As the aircraft began its descent for landing, the situation became even more difficult. The entire plane started shaking due to strong winds, and heavy raindrops began hitting the cockpit windshield. The pilots were doing everything they could to control the aircraft. Passengers clutched their seats tightly, knowing this landing was going to be extremely difficult. Then suddenly, through the dense fog, the runway became visible. And a few seconds later, at exactly 6:04 a.m., the aircraft finally landed. Seeing this, the crew and passengers breathed a sigh of relief. But the real shock came after the landing. When the pilots looked at the fuel gauge, their eyes widened in disbelief. Only 348 kilograms of fuel remained, just enough for 5 to 10 minutes of flight. If the pilots had decided to head toward Prayagraj, the aircraft might have crashed mid-air due to fuel exhaustion. After the incident, aviation experts began questioning the pilots' decisions. Although the pilots followed the airline's protocols, they made several critical mistakes, like insisting on flying to Lucknow despite deteriorating weather conditions, even though safer alternatives like Jaipur were available. Moreover, they failed to fully grasp the seriousness of the fuel situation in time. Despite this dangerously close call, the pilots' licenses were not revoked. However, their judgment, their negligence in fuel management, and their ability to make the right decisions under pressure have raised serious concerns. This incident taught us a valuable lesson. Pilots must be well trained to make timely and accurate decisions in high-pressure situations to avoid such crises in the future. If you've watched this video till the end, you now know how crucial those decisions were. And if you found this video informative, don't miss our deep dive into MH370. The $70 million search ends. What happened? Click now to uncover the mystery behind the world's most baffling aviation disappearance. Thank you for watching.